ask that question because I think that some authors of African descent, some, balk, quite frankly, and quite resent that categorization because it kind of assumes that there is a sort of variation in quality. I just wanted to know what your personal thoughts are on that.
Oh, you were looking at me? Okay. I think that ultimately there's only good literature, and that's what endures. There's good literature written by African people. Of course, I would much rather just be known as myself, and after that be known as my father's son or my mother's son. I'd like to be known as Ghanaian. That's very difficult for, I think we have to we work in the language of the industry, and we're labeled, and sometimes when you're labeled you have to take the label and use it as a weapon. And what I do as African Writers Evening is to give people a platform. And we're talking about good literature. If Jennifer's book, for instance, had been written and the context was European, and she was European, she might be published already. The fact of the matter is the gatekeepers, the publishing world is largely based in the West. And while there may not be any agenda of discrimination, people's tastes are influenced by the lives that they've had. And because they don't understand the African context, sometimes it's difficult for them to understand what's good and what's not about African literature. And sometimes we're the best people to know and to present it. I think that even the notion of what good literature is also a question of taste, is subjective. And the notion that African literature might not be good literature might be influenced by the very fact that African writing, or writing from Africa, is read through European eyes and judged through European values, and that might mean that if the person's not open-minded enough, they might judge it as not very good. Of course, there is also very bad African writing. And there's very bad European writing. And ultimately, I think it's an individual. You as the reader, if you tell me that the 100 best books in the world are what the Guardian said are the 100 best books in the world, I will not respect you, because it means that there is nothing of you that goes into your reading. So my 100 best books will be my 100 best books because I read in a particular way, influenced by my experiences. And none of us is, just like I was introducing Hisham, none of us is 100% anything with some of the experiences we've lived. And therefore, even the label European African, it's a joke really for anybody who's a deep thinker, but you can't force people to think deeply. So sometimes you have to create these boxes that people understand in order to communicate, really. That's my...
No, I agree totally. And also I think it's a problem of language, actually. I think the problem relies in what language is and what we think language is. Language is if we believe that language is actually what the words that we use are intrinsic and manifest, they're real, then we have a problem, because they're not. They point to things, they allude to something. So if I say, for example, chair, that word points to this chair, but it also points to a whole host of other chairs. The word chair itself means nothing, it's a shadow. As all that language is, it's a bit like miming, actually, language. And so, in order, it always strikes me as sort of what I love about it, why I am in love with language, is that it's our desperate attempt to try to understand things that are extremely complex about ourselves. Part of them is our identity, so we have to, because we need to, because that's how the way our brain works. We need to make lists, so we have to say woman, man, black, white, African, whatever, and so it resides in that. And so I think, in a way, if you see it that way, then the whole thing becomes almost unnecessary. But where it becomes necessary is when you remember that we are ourselves limited, meaning that we like to read things that remind us of ourselves. Most people are attracted to people that look like them. So we like to read things that we see ourselves in them. And it's easy, I think, to point at that and say it's prejudice and so on. But I think actually there is, I remember when I read, for example, Tayyip Saleh, the Sudanese novelist, when I read Season of Migration to the North, I remember how deeply it moved me, because I recognized something of myself in it. I remember when there are several books that one, you're moved by them, but that only, the currency of that goes to a certain level, and then when the reading increases or one's own experience of the world increases, then one finds ways in connecting with other people that are much subtler, on a much subtler level. So, for example, right now I find some of the writers that are closest to me are not necessarily, when I come and list them, they're not necessarily from where I'm from. All my affiliations, whether I'm Arabic, African, Middle East, Mediterranean, Muslim, all of these things. Very few of them are from, actually part of that. But that's not to say that that where you're from doesn't have a temperament. There is an African temperament, there's a Mediterranean temperament, there's a European temperament, a Russian temperament, a Russian darkness that is incredibly easy to distinguish from anything else, whether it's in music or literature. It's fantastic. It's haunting stuff. But so there is a quality, there is a flavor to where one is from, and the experiences and the food and the stories that we heard growing up. There's a joy in African literature, actually found here in this evening. Very few literary evenings have this kind of joy in it, where we've laughed today, we've encouraged each other. There was a sense of lightness and deep joy, and of course shadows and darkness and our pain and all that. But that's part of who we are. But